history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View, and I might just, as a program note, mention that at the bottom of the hour, we'll be talking with Debbie Wuthnow with iVoterguide, and we'll be talking about how to get ready for what will be unfolding fairly quickly in 2026, just a month from now. Some of you will be involved in campaigns. Some of you will even be voting within the next month or two for a candidate in the primary, and then, of course, we have the general election. And you might say, well, why should I care? Well, if you look at the ballot, no pro-life, pro-family is not on the ballot, but pro-life, pro-family candidates are, and others who would be against those ideas are there as well. And so I think it is always very important to begin to understand where a particular candidate stands. They have done an outstanding job of pulling together a lot of information. So we'll be talking with her about that. Then we have Lee Strobel with us. And Lee Strobel, of course, is an award-winning writer, editor, all the rest, as an individual that's probably best known for his book, The Case for Christ, but more recently, of course, has had The Case for Miracles, and that is now a film. And so we wanted to preview the film. We have a trailer so you can watch it and make a choice about whether or not you want to go, and I think you will want to do so. And so, if nothing else, wanted to cover some of that with him. In between, lots of things to talk about. In the first two segments here, I want to talk about what's going on with the Afghanistani refugees, and then what about Somalia? And then we'll get into some other topics in the last part of the second hour as well. But as I get into this, let's again issue the obvious disclaimers. Just because you came from Iran, Iraq, Sudan, whether you came from Afghanistan or Somalia, whatever it might be, doesn't necessarily mean that you have evil intentions, that you intend harm. Doesn't necessarily mean you're a terrorist. But when you come from those countries, there is probably a need for advanced vetting and scrutiny. And certainly what is unfolded with the killing and the wounding of two individuals, part of the National Guard, has caused a desire to do this. Now, to be fair, I will in a minute also quote from our friends at World Relief, who actually came out with a press release condemning the Trump administration's what they called needless and reprehensible relitigation of recently resettled refugees. And I don't want to hurt the refugees that are here that have good intentions and want to enjoy the benefits and fruits of living in the United States. But I can't just simply ignore the fact that there are dangerous people in this country. And the first article is a good reminder of that. Terry Jeffries has been on the program with us before, and Terry Jeffries says former President Joe Biden's record as commander-in-chief will forever be defined by August 26, 2021. If you don't remember, that was that catastrophic day in which there was a withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. The goal was originally on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001, which would be then by September 11th, 2021, we would have removed the various individuals, but it was done in such a terrible and haphazard way. And, of course, just as that was about unfolding, Taliban had returned to power. You have, of course, one of the worst security incidents in our history, which took place place on August 26, 2021, when a suicide bomber detonated explosives in front of the Abbey Gate that killed 13 U.S. service members, 11 Marines, 1 Navy corpsman, 1 Army soldier. 170 Afghanistanis were dead, more than 200 wounded, and a number of other U.S. service members, I think 18, that were wounded, which ended up being the deadliest day for the U.S. military since 2011 and the first U.S. military combat death since February 2020. Well, in the midst of all that, of course, President Biden put together Operation Allies Refuge and Allies Welcome programs. And so we, for a period of time from July 2021 to 2022, have welcomed 79,000 Afghan evacuees. And yet now we have the fact that the report that was done more recently looked at the fact that the Department of Homeland Security may have admitted or paroled individuals in the United States who pose a risk to national security and the safety of local communities. Now, Terry Jeffrey uses an example or two. One is Nasir Ahmad Tawadi, individual who indeed was entering the United States with an attempt to be involved in all sorts of terrorist activities, pled guilty, and then wrote out that he voluntarily agreed to, with at least one person, provide support to ISIS, an attempt to provide support to ISIS. That other person was his brother-in-law, Abdul Haji Zada. And so you have individuals like that. Of course, you have the shooter himself, Ramanullah Nakawal. And again, the question that Terry Jeffrey is asking is a good one. How many more terrorists are among the 79,000 Afghans that President Biden brought into the United States after the Taliban regained control of that country? Again, people might say, well, it's unfair to punish individuals that come from that country if they do not intend us harm. True. But as we pointed out in a piece, which I would want to point you back to on Tuesday that we had by Kevin McCullough, he goes through this long list of what is found in many of those countries, whether it's honor killings or forced circumcision of girls or wife beating, children forced into child marriage, and on and on and on. And back when we actually limited individuals coming from certain countries, those would be Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Should we not add, for example, Afghanistan to that list? And as we'll talk about in just a minute, the issue, of course, of what has happened with Somalia. For those of you that actually go to the Babylon Bee, they have a section called Not the Bee. And the other day, they put together quite a list, I might add, of the fact that here, individuals that used to work with these so-called Afghani allies were so maybe potentially dangerous that oftentimes they had to have what were called guardian angels, in other words, armed guards standing watch to make sure that those individuals that were Afghani killers weren't going to maybe turn their guns on American soldiers. And so there are some very poignant comments here. And as one person said, tens of thousands of unvetted Afghani aliens have hurt or terrorized Americans and flooded our communities with criminals, terrorists, and other threats. Doesn't mean that all people that are from Afghanistan are dangerous, which is why Matthew Sorens, who's been on the program with us, Vice President of Advocacy and Policy at World Relief, has been very critical of the attempt to litigate, as they said, some of these individuals and to go back and re-vet some of them. But I don't know what you can do unless you just simply want to turn a blind eye to what has unfolded in the D.C. area. Not only the shooting and the killing, but a couple of other threats there as well. Lots to talk about. We will continue that conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Chemical abortions have become the primary way women end their pregnancy after the FDA approved a new generic abortion drug, a large national survey was conducted by McLaughlin and Associates. They found that 7 in 10 likely voters approved of requiring a doctor visit prior to receiving a prescription for abortion drugs. This percentage include a majority of liberal voters. They believe that screening is necessary for several reasons. First, there is the possibility of coercion and abuse. 2/3 agree with the statement that abortion drugs might be used by an abuser to cover up rape, exploitation, and sex trafficking. A second reason for a doctor visit is the medical concerns associated with these abortion pills. As we have documented in our booklet, A Biblical View on Chemical Abortion, the rate of ER visits after chemical abortions has increased 500% since 2002, and 1 in 5 women who take abortion pills will experience so much bleeding they will require medical attention. A third reason is abortion drug poisoning. The vast majority of voters agree that no one should be able to get abortion drugs online or from a foreign country and be able to give them to a woman without her knowledge or consent. An even larger percentage approve of requiring the FDA drug labels to accurately report the real-world impact of drug on patients. This would include warnings about harmful complications like bleeding, sepsis, and infections. Republican senators have called on the FDA and HHS to act. I believe this poll provides ample justification for bringing back safeguards that were removed under the Biden administration. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you've been listening to Point of View for any length of time, you know that we use the word truth quite often and maybe overuse it, but I think it is necessary in a time when people are afraid to speak the truth. Now, a key verse for that would be Ephesians 4:15, that we are to speak the truth in love. And it does seem to me that sometimes speaking the truth in a culture that is wanting to condemn you for speaking the truth has made individuals very quiet. And so in some respects, if you speak the truth in love about the fact that we have some individuals that are here from other countries that don't share our view about law, maybe don't share our view about morality, maybe don't even share our view about corruption, because some of them come from countries where corruption is just a day-to-day affair. You have to pay off everyone to get anything done. And as we've already pointed out as well, when we talk about the Muslim culture, don't share our view about how to treat women or a variety of other topics. And so this, I think, is going to be a real issue, because what has happened as we get to the next article, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, is that as soon as you investigate a group that has an ethnic background, that opens you up to being charged with racism, xenophobia, whatever it might be. And I think we are simply going to have to be willing to speak the truth, even sometimes when people will call us names. And I mentioned just a minute ago that there are people putting together accounts of what it was like, for example, in Afghanistan, to deal with certain individuals. And if you go to X, one of these accounts from veterans is called Infantry DORT. Infantry, D-O-R-T. And it decided to actually explain to Americans what American troops saw when they were in Afghanistan, because they want to help Americans understand that not all cultures, not all practices, not all beliefs are equal. Now, again, saying that instantaneously gets you criticized, but I think we have to speak the truth, even though many times people will criticize us, because, let's face it, not all cultures are equal. Most of the people that want to hold for the idea that we shouldn't make judgments about other cultures would react horribly to some of the practices in those other cultures. And I gave you the short list. Again, you can go back to this piece by Kevin McCullough, who gives us quite a list of what is typical oftentimes in a Muslim culture. Does that mean that everybody here from Afghanistan, or now we're going to be talking about Somalia, every one of those individuals is holding to views that are hostile to Christianity and hostile to the government and hostile to the American experience? Not necessarily. Some of those who have come from Afghanistan are Christians. Some of them that have come from Somalia are Christians. And that brings me back to a piece by Matthew Sorens, who was saying he wants to not put Christian refugees through the same kind of vetting process. But if you've come from one of those countries, I think we need to make sure where your attitudes and values are, or we will pay a price. Because back to this key point, not everybody has the same view of laws, of morality, or even of corruption and women. And I use the word corruption now to get to our second article, and this one comes from the editors of National Review. Minnesota's massive welfare fraud scandal, which, by the way, has been going on for some time and really should have been part of the presidential election, because what has happened in Minnesota is in part facilitated by or ignored by the current governor there, who is also the vice presidential nominee. But let's get into this. The editors write that the nation is beginning to awaken to an ongoing scandal of massive proportions in Minnesota, where state taxpayers have had somewhere north, are you ready for this, of $1 billion stolen from them by concentric rings of welfare fraudsters based in and around Minneapolis's tightly knit Somalia diaspora community. It is a story with far deeper implications than mere dollars and cents, one that implicates our national immigration policy, among other things. But let us first note the depth of the fraud and how long it was ignored by the media at large. Although not our friends at Powerline, who have been following it up from the beginning, and especially Scott Johnson, who covered the trials. In other words, they're not necessarily endorsing all the investigation, but they're acknowledging that. And so we now go back to September 2022. Okay, that goes back how many years? 3 years ago. And the federal government began to indict multiple sets of Minneapolis area Somali Americans whose charges are, and they've been actually indicted on charges of defrauding the Minneapolis and Minnesota welfare and public assistance programs. First came Feeding Our Future scandal, where to date 75 defendants associated with this Somali charitable organization allegedly chose to feed on the sudden flood of the post-2020 COVID-era relief money available to anyone willing to vaguely claim their cause. Also, the FBI raided their fake meal locations in January 2022. The federal indictments have been piling up since then, but it turns out that you have only one of a multiple of government fraud schemes emerging from, of course, the Minneapolis Somali community during the COVID era. They go on to then talk about this report from City Journal. Now, we've had people from City Journal on here with the Manhattan Institute. This particular report from City Journal by Ryan Thorpe and Christopher Rufo, I quote Christopher Rufo quite often, caught Donald Trump's attention and led him to blow up the story and move to revoke the temporary protected status for all these Somali migrants. Now the scandal has been dignified over the weekend because the New York Times, by the way, the New York Times, as much as we tend to be critical, have done a tremendous amount of good work. Number one, contradicting the Washington Post story about Pete Hegseth and the war crimes. And now this one, which was an investigative article by the New York Times. And we have a link there so you can read it for yourself. One that specifically notes that the Minnesota governor, That would be Tim Walz, former vice presidential nominee, I might add. His responsibility for a method of fraud that took shape and flight under his misadministration. Progressive America is officially permitted to notice the matter, although it won't draw the correct conclusions. And the reason they say that is, up until now, anybody that would point to that would be accused of racism, being anti-Somali, xenophobic, whatever. You know how that goes. But interestingly enough, the career prosecutor, Joe Thompson, who has the federal lead on this, said, quote, "This fraud crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of widespread failure across nearly every level of leadership in Minnesota. Politicians who turned a blind eye, agencies that failed to act, prosecutors and law enforcement who didn't punish enough, reporters who ignored the story, community leaders who stayed silent, and a public that wanted to believe it couldn't happen here. This isn't just a few criminals exploiting the system. This is a system that's been begging to be exploited." So again, one of the other comments from the editors of National Review were, "The unpleasant reality is that we imported an element of Somalia's culture of criminality, and for no good reason, while bogus charges of racism were used to keep suspicious authorities from following up on the blatant signs that something was amiss." Now, if you actually have seen at least one member of Congress from Minnesota accusing everybody of racism, at the same time under criticism herself from not only Republican leaders but Democratic leaders, maybe you can understand a little bit more that is taking place. But up until now, we haven't said much about this massive, and it isn't just the welfare fraud. There's a fraud over all sorts of other aspects of medical treatment and as well. But this one, I think, is sufficient enough to at least give you an understanding of how significant the scandal was and how every particular place where you'd expect some safeguards, some kind of checks and balances, none of that existed. And once again, I come back to one of our arguments that we don't want to say that everybody from Somalia is engaged in corruption. But if you've come from a culture where corruption is sort of the standard fare, not surprising that this is unfolded. Don't want to paint with a broad brush, but we don't want to ignore what is going on in some of these communities from individuals taken from Muslim countries who didn't come with the same view of law, the same view of morality, the same view of women, or even the same view of the evils of corruption. That's all we have for this segment. We'll be back with more right after this.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now. Or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, going to talk about elections, and some of you might say, it's December. Why are we talking about elections? Well, first of all, some of you that are listeners in Tennessee, of course, we've already talked about this particular case, the special election in the 7th Congressional District in Tennessee, just elected Mark Van Epps, but it is an illustration that even during the so-called off year, there are special elections. And, of course, we've talked about the significance of the elections of, for example, the mayor in New York City or the governors in places like New Jersey or Virginia or a variety of other places, or the newly elected mayor in Seattle, Washington. And we recognize that there really is never an off year, but we are headed very quickly into the midterm elections. And although some of you might say, well, that doesn't happen till November, there is already quite a bit happening right now behind the scenes because you have these primaries coming up. So we thought it would be very good, first of all, to once again reintroduce to you the iVoterguide. You can go to iVoterguide.com, although we have a link to it at the website there because it's right beneath the picture of Debbie Wuthnow, who is the president of iVoterguide, also is a vice president at American Family Association Action and a member of the board. As we've mentioned before, holds a master's degree in computer science from Princeton University, joined iVoterguide back in 2011 as a data analyst and then became president in 2018. And Debbie, welcome back to Point of View.
Thanks for having me back, Kerby.
Well, let's talk about elections. And you certainly have been occasionally putting out voter guides during this so-called off year. So it's an illustration that there's really never anymore a downtime because there are special elections, there are off-year elections. And I think in some respects now we're headed towards what could be some very consequential midterm elections. What have you found?
Well, it is. My team was just talking about, it's been an off year, but we've been really pretty busy. There have been dozens of special elections that have happened since November of 2024. In fact, there's almost 24 special elections that we are covering between now and the first primary election that happens on March the 3rd. So lots of elections going on, and that's just at the state legislative level. A lot of us have had school board elections that have happened during the same time frame, as you mentioned, for mayors, there's city councils. There's just, it happens at different times around the nation, and we all really need to have our eyes tuned because the fewer people vote in those off-year midterm or those off-year special elections, the local elections, which makes every vote even more powerful because there are fewer votes that are cast. So we just encourage people to be engaged, to actually get on iVoterguide's email list, and we'll let you know when we're covering those elections in your area. Most of the ones we're covering between now and March 3rd are state-level elections, so we'll just let the people know that are in that state. But we all need to pay attention. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot at stake, as we saw in Tennessee, and as we know is upcoming for the 2026 midterms. There's going to be all of the House and a third of the Senate that's going to be on the ballot, but it's not November that really we need to pay attention to. It's the primary, as you intimated, and that starts March 3rd.
Well, and that primary is so important because you and I both know Richard Ford, and we used to jokingly say, using his numbers, that you get 10 times the impact on a primary as you do in a general election because so few people vote in a primary. Your vote is much more important. But just to give people a sense of the breadth, I can remember when this began, it was a tedious process and still is. But if you go to the website right now, and I would encourage everybody, if they're near a computer, do so because we're going to be kind of working our way through what you can find on the website. You will see this map of the United States and 15,190 candidates researched in 2024. That wears me out just thinking about it because I know what you go through, but explain to our listeners for just a minute what it takes for you to actually go through and research and evaluate a candidate.
Well, we have a fabulous team that has now grown to over 70 individuals who help us gather the data on candidates. So we start by gathering scorecards of the different state legislative and congressional candidates. There are organizations who score how those elected officials vote on bills. So we can base, information based on their actions of what policies they support or do not support or what do they oppose and sponsor. So we have hundreds of scorecards in our system. Our team is gathering those every time they're released at the end of a legislative session. We then go through the process of gathering campaign finance data. because what a candidate does with their money, both who funds their campaign, who is purchasing, you could say, influence over that candidate, but also who that individual as a candidate supported with their own money. Personally, did they support the NRA? Did they support Planned Parenthood? Well, there's a whole bunch of organizations that have to file reports with the federal government and the state level governments. And we have all of that data in iVoterguide's database. So we're gathering all of that. We're updating that constantly, making sure that we have every piece of data available. Then as we get closer to the election, we're finding out who's filed to run, what are their websites, where are their social media accounts, and then as even closer, who's endorsing those candidates,
right,
and really saying this person is mine. And then every candidate gets a chance to answer our questionnaire. So we've just updated our questionnaire to make it ready for 2026. Issues kind of change. We go through a big cycle of refreshing that for 2026, and we're ready to send it in December any week for the primary in Texas.
And I might just mention that in the past, one of the, I thought, flaws of some other people were doing some of these voter guides is they would send out the questionnaire and some would not fill that out. And that'd be the end of that, because then you'd have maybe one and not the other. Or in some cases, judges that are elected in the state are certainly ones that are very unlikely to fill that out. But what you have figured out is by seeing who has supported them, who has endorsed them. If you see a particular organization that has supported these individuals, who is with maybe Texas Values or IFA Action or maybe the Texas Homeschool Association, many of which, by the way, are your own partners and supporters, you have a pretty good idea. If indeed the individual is supported by the National Organization of Women or certainly LGBTQ organizations or a variety of others, you have a pretty good idea. So the bottom line is that these particular evaluations that you put together pull from a variety of different sources and are so complete as to really help individuals before they go into the voting booth know a lot more about who they might be voting for.
Well, and on top of that, Kerby, you're spot on. We also add in volunteers, which we have almost 1,000 of them across the nation. And, they get tasked and assigned about 35 candidates, and then they read their social media accounts. They read their websites. They do some internet digging to see what they can find about those candidates. And that's really our secret weapon, as finding those little tidbits that helps us to assign a rating to every candidate, which we do. Not only do we gather the data, but those volunteers help us propose ratings on looks like a gas gauge. It ranges from far left to far right with, verified liberal, verified conservative, all in there. But yet the voters can see all the data for themselves. So it's really trying to get every piece of political intelligence we can find and verify. AI is this thing out there now, and we use the tools that are out there, but we verify everything is accurate and source-driven and trustworthy for the voters, because, there's so much spin out there in the media, even in the flyers from the candidates, different news sources. We want people to have a source they can trust that has done the due diligence that's verified.
Let me mention just before we take a break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about some other aspects of the iVoterguide. One of those which is very beneficial to somebody maybe for the very first time is see who represents me, because right at the beginning you can put down your address and it will pop up then who your members of Congress are and a variety of other individuals. I suspect that a good number of our listeners already know that, because we have our Take Action item. When you click on the Take Action, if you've already signed up before, it already pops up your two senators and your member of Congress, because those are people you might be writing to. But nevertheless, if you haven't done that, or if maybe you do know those because of some of the things you've done through Point of View, you will learn a lot more about the individuals that represent you. So one of the best services I think you provide is just for a person coming off the street, never having written or even understood the political process, you make it very easy to find out, first of all, who represents you, and then to actually get a personalized voter guide, right?
Yeah. Well, our main goal is to get you a personalized voter guide. That Who Represents You feature is brand new. We just rolled it out a couple of weeks ago because people need to know who represents them, both their senators, their congressmen, their state senator, their state rep. And it even goes down in many areas to your county representatives, your local representatives, your mayor. And it'll give you a link to how iVoterguide has rated in the past. You need to know who's going to be on the ballot in 2026 look right now, see what those people are, and then start praying for good, solid conservative candidates to run if they don't already represent you. So, and pray for them. That's another thing that we all need to be doing, is lifting up those who are elected to represent us for wisdom from God.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of the things that are available through the iVoterguide. Debbie Wuthnow with us. And let me, even as we go to a break, just encourage you to sign up. I get those updates all the time, even for places where I don't live, but I'm glad to know about. We've got a voter guide here or there, because then I can let you know on air. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again with Debbie Wuthnow. Again, she is president of iVoterguide. Again, I would encourage you to go to that website. And I might also mention as a program note, next hour, in about 20 minutes or so, we'll be talking with our good friend Lee Strobel about his new film, The Case for Miracles, based upon the book. But Debbie, I thought for just a minute we might talk about the importance of voting. And I mentioned Richard Ford. I might mention him one more time, simply because in our booklet on Make Your Vote Count, we put in the citizenship quotient, which he created years ago, a citizenship IQ, and basically said that you get 10 points if you can name your 2 U.S. senators, another 10 points if you can name your U.S. representative, you get 10 points if you can name your state senator, and 10 points if you can name your state representative. That'd be 40 points out of 100 already, and he's found only 5% could do that. By the time then, if you've prayed for your legislators, which you talk about, that's 10 points. You get 10 points if you're registered to vote, and 10 points if you contacted one of your representatives, 10 points if you voted in the last 3 elections, and eventually you get up to 100. And what's so interesting is he found the average score was a little over 20. And you think about that, if you're registered to vote and you voted in the last election, you already get to 20. But I remember watching him sometimes when he would go into groups where he would maybe say to the individuals in this particular company, you know, a lot of people here don't even know the names of their state senator or state representative. And everybody starts looking at their shoes and then turns to the CEO and says, oh, yeah, at least you know. He doesn't know either. And it does seem to me that, and I had to at least get a laugh out of you, to recognize that for people that still say it doesn't matter who I vote for, please, I've put together lists that I use oftentimes during elections of the number of elections won by one vote or one vote per precinct. There's a few that have been tie votes. So your vote counts, but it seems to me if we're going to be a good citizen, we should know these things. And one of the quickest ways to do that is just to click on where your picture is, and it has the website, iVoterguide.com. Click on See Who Represents Me, and now you know. And then you should be praying for them as well. And then eventually, when you have signed up, you'll get a personalized voter guide. I mean, I don't think you could do any more than actually driving them to the polls. You've just provided so many great services. But speak to this important issue of voting in the first place.
Well, you know, we are blessed to live in a representative government. So we don't have people establishing the laws that we don't get to pick. So they're supposed to represent us. So we want to choose people that really share our values. So that's why iVoterguide began. Really, Richard was, I would say, inspired by God to understand that, you know, we need to choose wisely those we vote for. He also is very passionate about praying for those that are elected and knowing who they are from his big survey. So that's really how iVoterguide began, was, you know, God inspired Richard to this whole concept. And it began with, you know, researching the candidates on your ballot and making it easy. We will say that we provide personalized ballots for every address in America. And we do, in many cases, down to your state legislative candidates. And now with this Who Represents Me, you can see not just who's on your ballot, but you can at any time go there and enter your address and just see who represents you down to your state rep. It's the cheat sheet for Richard's citizenship quiz. You can see who all your representatives are. And it even helps you contact them because we have their contact information. So we really are trying to equip Christians and all citizens, really, to be good stewards of their citizenship, to know who represents them, to lift them up in prayer, to contact them and share with them, you know, what you think about what they're doing. I live in Austin, Texas. I don't really have people who represent me that share my values, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't pray for them and I shouldn't, contact them to let them know what I feel about it. And it still means I need to vote in every election and encourage, people who do share my values to run for those seats and for those races that are going to be on my ballot. So every person needs to be a good steward of all the things God's given them. We're called to be salt and light. We're salt, which means not just sharing the gospel, but representing Christian values in all areas of our life. And government is certainly an area that impacts us, and it's those local elections that impact us even more directly. See who those people are, know who their names are, research them, and get out there and vote for the ones who share your values next time they're on your ballot.
Outstanding. Let's talk about some of the issues. Again, that's on the website here, Right to Life. My commentary today is about the abortion pill poll, religious liberty. Tomorrow we have Kelly Shackelford and Aaron Smith on. They'll be talking about the case that was before the Supreme Court on Wednesday that was argued. National defense, a topic we addressed the other day. Healthcare, a topic I'm getting in the second hour with a piece by Star Parker. The economy, something we seem to be talking about so often. And border security, a topic that we addressed for the first half of the program today when we talked about Afghanistan and we talked about Somalia. So these are some of the key issues that you use to evaluate where a candidate stands. And I think, again, the breadth of those issues is why I think the iVoterguide stands out compared to some of the other voter guides in the past.
Well, I would agree. And that's part of that, the questionnaire is where we really make all those issues come to, I guess it's a way to put in writing what those issues are. So we have about 35 questions, and it covers, multiple aspects of the economy. We even cover healthcare. We cover immigration, national security. And as we craft those questions, we're looking at, what do voters want to know about the positions of the people who are going to represent them? And equally as much, we have to discuss what is the conservative answer on these types of questions, because that's then what we're looking for as we're rating the candidates. We're looking at, for each of those positions and each of those issues, what evidence can we find of what this this candidate would, or would their stand be? What would they vote for? So it's a challenge for us to train and vet panelists and then to define what are those key issues and even the nuances of some of them. When we look at Right to Life, I'm a pro-life voter, but now there's some, the exceptions for abortion, there's the chemical abortion pill that's out there and the various aspects of that, and there's also in vitro fertilization. And what is the position going to be on that? So we really do dive deep in thinking about what are the conservative positions that voters are going to care about, that we need to know where the elected officials are going to stand on those things. And honestly, I want to know their positions on those, but I also want to get a glimpse at their worldview, because I would love somebody with a biblical worldview that understands I'm not God. God is God, and He's the one who gives me my rights. And that would guide their decision-making process in issues that aren't even on the radar right now. So all of that factors into what iVoterguide does, and all of those issues. And it's just a lot to put on any one voter, and that's why I believe God created iVoterguide, to do that research, to provide it to the church for free, I might add. All you need to do is enter your address at iVoterguide.com to get your personalized ballot. But, we do it for Christians. We do it for voters, for Americans across the nation, because we all want to be participating in our government and in being knowledgeable about those issues and those positions.
And again, she suggested take action. The first one, of course, is to sign up. But if you slide down, there's a place where you could become a panelist. Of course, you might want to be a partner. You might want to be somebody's praying for our leaders. There's a place for neighborhood outreach, church outreach, and so much more. So take the time to go to iVoterguide.com. You'll find all sorts of great resources there. And I would encourage you, the first step is to sign up. Second one, if you don't know who your elected representatives are, plug that in, and then you'll get that printed out, and eventually you'll get a personalized voter guide. So all of it coming up with that great information. Debbie, as always, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks.
Let me, if I can, take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to our good friend, Lee Strobel. Of course, you're familiar with his book, The Case for Miracles. The new film is coming out in about a week, and I think you want to attend. I think you want to get as many of your friends to attend. Might be a good one to bring your skeptical friends to as well. So we'll find out more about that from Lee Strobel right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time, just a few minutes, talking with our good friend Lee Strobel. But let me just kind of give you some background. First of all, as you well know, he is best known for a lot of the Case for books, the Case for Christ and the Case for Faith and the Case for Creation. More recently, he's also put together, of course, the Case for Heaven and the Case for Miracles. But I'll hold up this booklet. This is one that I put together, which came out in August. It is entitled The Supernatural and Paranormal, because his latest book kind of pulls that together. My wife and I were reading through that, and he said, you know, this is kind of the book that pulls pieces from each one of his more recent books and is perhaps one of his best books, although it's hard to pick the best book because he is such a gifted writer. But that book was Seeing the Supernatural, Investigating Angels, Demons, Mystical Dreams, Near-Death Encounters, and Other Mysteries of the Unseen World. Now, this was a book that his publishers at Zondervan wanted him to write because they wanted to pull together some ideas and also have a book that you could hand to your skeptical, non-Christian friends. And so, in some respects, that book is one that I would highly recommend. And if you would like, we could also probably make available this little booklet, which is, as I oftentimes say, kind of like the Cliff Notes version of the book, just so in a very short amount of reading, you can get into that. And, of course, in that particular book, he spends spend some time talking about these near-death experiences, which I think would certainly be appropriate, but that's mostly in his book, The Case for Heaven. Then he, of course, talks about some of the miracles, and that's what we'll be talking about here today when we connect up with him in just a minute. And then also, I think it's so helpful because the book then talks about the dangers of tapping into the spiritual realm. And one of the individuals that he interviews is Ron Rhodes, who's been on the program, in which they talk about ghost stories, psychics, and the paranormal, which is why I think this little booklet I've created is certainly something you can hand to your friends, as well as something that would be helpful for people that haven't necessarily picked up the book, Seeing the Supernatural, investigating angels, demons, mystical dreams, near-death encounters, and other mysteries of the unseen world. And so we put that together. But most importantly, I do want to spend some time talking about the fact that you've heard the interview we've done with him in the past on The Case for Miracles. Now in the theaters, December 15th to the 18th, you would be able to see in your local theater the film. And I thought it would be appropriate to get Lee Strobel on, who's a good friend of the ministry. Lee, thank you for being with us today. Well, I guess we don't have Lee yet, so we'll give that a try in just a minute, and we'll see if we can connect up with him because he's been doing some interviews, and I thought we had him, and we'll get him in just a minute. But let me just mention that this is a real great opportunity, as I've said before, to really talk about some of these areas of miracles and the rest. And so I think we have Lee Strobel on now, don't we? So far, not picking him up. So I guess I'll just keep talking until we can work out the details there. But again, the particular film will be in the theaters December 15th to the 18th. It's, again, one of those that I would certainly encourage you to find out. If you click on the button that says Buy Tickets, then you can, of course, watch the trailer, although we've already posted the trailer there. And again, it's one of these Fathom events, and you know what that's like. It is a great opportunity for you to attend, but I would also point to a point on the website that says bring a group. We have done this before many times with my Sunday school class, our life group, and that is to bring as many people as possible and almost buy out the theater. Now, you may not have a really large, small group, but this is, I think, just a great opportunity to bring other people there. And, of course, as I pointed out, this series of books that have come out over the last couple of years by Lee Strobel, whether it's The Case for Miracles, The Case for Heaven, or this latest one, Seeing the Supernatural, these are all just great resources, if nothing else, because they can be put in the hands of a non-Christian, maybe a person that's a skeptic, maybe a person that says, well, I just think, the only thing that's real is the here and now, and I don't see any evidence for the supernatural. That's why he's been doing some of these. And I think we now have Lee Strobel. So, Lee, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Kerby, how you doing, my friend?
Well, I want to ask you how you're doing. I'm sure you've just been doing one interview after another interview after another interview. But I'm glad that you had a moment to share with us because you know how much we appreciate the books. And I was just promoting the fact that I've even put together little booklets on your books to encourage people to get things like The Case for Miracles, The Case for Heaven, or Seeing the Supernatural. But this one, I've been watching the trailer and can't wait to see it myself. But you have really pulled out some stops, and this looks like a great film to bring all of our friends, neighbors, and coworkers.
Yes, I think it is. You know, we look at cases of miracles that are well documented, and many of them published in peer-reviewed medical journals, documented by medical researchers. I kind of have four elements that I look at about whether or not a miracle is credible. First of all, do we have solid medical documentation? Number two, do we have multiple and credible eyewitnesses who have no motive to deceive? Number three, is there no natural explanation that makes any sense? And number four, does it take place in the context of prayer? And we've got those cases. These are not just things you read on the internet. These are well-documented cases, and they'll blow your mind. They'll blow your mind. And I think the film does it in a creative way. It's about a car trip that I take with a friend of mine whose family's from Guatemala. His dad was an atheist who became a pastor of a church in South Central L.A. He grew up in a Pentecostal home that believed like miracles are right around every corner. And I grew up as an atheist, and so we have these different perspectives. And we're taking a car trip down Route 66 in the southwest United States. The cinematography is breathtaking. And we talk about these miracles, and then you actually see reenactments or actual people involved from the miracles that we flash to. So I think it's kind of a creative approach that capture people's imaginations.
Well, nothing else. I didn't expect to see you in a Ford Bronco riding down Route 66, but there we go. And again,
1967 Ford Bronco.
Yeah, how appropriate. But again, when I first saw the various trailer clips, I'm thinking, okay, you look like you're in New Mexico or Arizona, wherever, you know, and I'm just I'm trying to figure it out. And I see the Wigwam Motel, and again, it isn't just going into a hospital and talking to a doctor or something like that. You, of course, have a great deal of creativity. But I think it would be important to mention the fact that you have some of these individuals, like a woman with multiple sclerosis given days to live, and then all of a sudden that is the case. So I want to take a break, since we have one of the breaks now just coming up, and we'll get into a couple of those stories.
Yeah,
and of course, I got a chance to see you when you were at Prestonwood Baptist Church, because you were in Dallas collecting another one of those stories for the film. So again, if you find yourself right now saying, well, okay, I'm already sold. I love my Lee Strobel, and I already know about his book, The Case for Miracles.movie. And of course, if you would like to see the trailer, we have, of course, a picture of Lee Strobel, and right underneath there you have a link to his website, leestrobel.com, for all of his books. And right underneath that is the trailer. And if you wanted to watch the trailer even during the break, we're going to have a 3-minute break, and the trailer's 2 minutes, so you could watch that, and we'll come back and spend some more time talking with Lee Strobel about this new film, The Case for Miracles, coming out December 15th through the 18th. We'll talk more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Chemical abortions have become the primary way women end their pregnancy. After the FDA approved a new generic abortion drug, a large national survey was conducted by McLaughlin and Associates. They found that 7 in 10 likely voters approved of requiring a doctor visit prior to receiving a prescription for abortion drugs. This percentage include a majority of liberal voters. They believe that screening is necessary for several reasons. First, there is the possibility of coercion and abuse. 2/3 agree with the statement that abortion drugs might be used by an abuser to cover up rape, exploitation, and sex trafficking. A second reason for a doctor visit is the medical concerns associated with these abortion pills. As we have documented in our booklet, A Biblical View on Chemical Abortion, the rate of ER visits after chemical abortions has increased 500% since 2002, and 1 in 5 women who take abortion pills will experience so much bleeding they will require medical attention. A third reason is abortion drug poisoning. The vast majority of voters agree that no one should be able to get abortion drugs online or from a foreign country and be able to give them to a woman without her knowledge or consent. An even larger percentage approve of requiring the FDA drug labels to accurately report the real-world impact of drug on patients. This would include warnings about harmful complications like bleeding, sepsis, and infections. Republican senators have called on the FDA and HHS to act. I believe this poll provides ample justification for bringing back safeguards that were removed under the Biden administration. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Lee Strobel with us for a few more minutes. And again, I would point you to the caseformiracles.movie. And I thought I'd take for a minute, Lee, just to talk about the fact that it's in the in the various films and in the movie theaters December 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th. There's a button there that says bring a group. And that's one of the things I've done over the years, whether it's been your film or others, because you can bring all sorts of individuals individuals, maybe in a Sunday school class or in the neighborhood, but this would be one that I think you could bring your non-Christian friends, neighbors, skeptics, and others, because they are going to be confronted by the fact that these are just remarkable miracles that have been validated by people in the medical community.
That's right. I think that they'll even see the number one skeptic in America make an appearance in the movie, Michael Shermer, editor of Skeptic Magazine, who I interviewed for the book. I actually gave him 3 chapters to spell out why he doesn't believe in miracles, and then the rest of the book kind of responds to his objections and answers them. But, I mean, my hope is that Christians will come and their faith will be bolstered. They'll walk away ever more in awe of God. But I hope a spiritual seeker, and people are more spiritually sensitive, I believe, during the Christmas season. So this is a great opportunity to bring someone who's just kind of spiritually confused and then go out to coffee with them afterwards or dessert and talk about it. Say, what do you think? And just let that be the beginning of a conversation, and then invite them to Christmas Eve services at your church. Why not? Let's take some risks for the gospel. Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6 say, hey, let's seize opportunities to, reach out to outsiders.
Yes. And again, I might just mention, since you were talking about some other individuals, Dr. Candy Gunther Brown is kind of an expert on spiritual issues. Dr. Hugh Ross has been on the program with us before, some apologists and others. But just to give us a little bit of a feel, maybe I'd let you pick out a miracle or two that you go into more depth in the film, because you have documented so many of those in The Case for Miracles, which came out in 2018.
Well, one of my favorites is a woman who was blind for 12 years with juvenile macular degeneration, which is an incurable condition. And she went to school for the blind. She learned how to read Braille, and she married a Baptist pastor. And one night they're getting ready to go to bed, and she's already in bed. He comes over, he puts his hand on her shoulder, and he begins to cry and begins to pray. And he says, Lord, I know you can heal my wife. I know you can do it. And Lord, I pray you do it tonight. And with that, she opened her eyes and saw her husband for the first time. She said later, after years of darkness, I opened my eyes. I could see perfectly. It's a miracle. And I think it was. That case was documented by multiple medical researchers and published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. So this is and I think it's the only case in history where someone was spontaneously healed of juvenile macular degeneration. So, I don't know what other explanation you can come up with, given the circumstances of that case, other than God supernaturally intervened and performed a miracle. The only way I think to get around it is to rule out miracles at the outset, like I used to do as an atheist, to say, miracles are impossible. Now, show me your evidence. Well, wait a minute. I think it's more logical to say, show me your evidence, and let me reach a conclusion consistent with where the evidence points.
And so, again, some great illustrations of that. Talk about maybe the other side of that, because I know that you also address this issue of, okay, we see these miracles, but what about those times when I prayed diligently and I did not see a miracle? Can you speak to that?
Yes. The movie deals with that, as the book does. And this is important. My wife has an incurable neuromuscular condition. She's been in pain for 20 years, and she'll be in pain the rest of her life unless God intervenes. It's an incurable condition. And he hasn't chosen to do that. Now, I believe God will heal all his children. It may be as we enter into the next life. But miracles were not automatic in the New Testament either.
No.
I mean, Matthew says Jesus didn't do many miracles in Nazareth. In Matthew chapter 10, we have the disciples given the authority to heal, and then 7 chapters later, they couldn't heal an epileptic boy. And Paul didn't heal everybody. He had a buddy named Trophimus. Trophimus got sick. What does Paul do? Heal him? No. Paul goes off on a missionary journey. And then Paul had this thorn in the flesh that was never apparently healed. So, it was not automatic then either. And by the way, I was thinking the other day, maybe I'm a little weird in the way I think, but I'm thinking, what if God answered every plea for a miracle to happen right now in everybody who prays for that? We couldn't do science, because science was based on predictability. And then it would be chaotic in terms of what's going on in our world that way. So that's kind of a quirky thought, but I'm not sure you could do science if that were true. Plus the fact that we throw around Romans 8:28, that God can cause all things to work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And we throw that around, but that's a verse from the Bible. That's true. And if God can take the worst thing that's ever happened in the universe, which is the death of the Son of God on a cross, and from that produce the best thing that's ever happened in the universe, which is the opening of heaven to all who follow him, then he can even deal with the circumstances of our lives, even the pain in our lives, and cause good to emerge. And I see that in my wife, who is a woman of compassion and empathy that I don't believe she ever would be had she not experienced these difficulties in her life.
So well said. Let's, if we can, just talk about how to prepare for it, and then I'll let you get on to probably your next interview. And that is, we should, first of all, click the button that says Buy Tickets. And there's another one that I haven't mentioned until now, and that is there's a place where people can sign up for a free seventh day devotional based on the film. And talk about that, because that's another way to kind of get ready for this.
Yes, many of your listeners will know the name Mark Middleberg, who's a great apologist and evangelist. His son, who has a master's degree in philosophy of religion and is a great young apologist, he's written this 7-day devotional that kind of dovetails with the film and talks about miracles and kind of brings you along on some various issues that are involved with the film in a very creative way. So that's a free resource that people can access. And maybe you have a small group and get everybody in the small group kind of going through that 7-day devotional and then talk about it in your group.
Might just mention, since we mentioned Mark Middleberg, the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics. I think you worked with him to get that started, and it's one of the reasons why encouraging some of the young people, if they'd like to learn about these issues like apologetics and evangelism, Colorado College is a great place to learn about that, isn't it?
Well, yes, we've actually ended that program there. We had a 5-year contract for that, and that's ended. But there are some good opportunities around the country. You know, my son's a PhD in theology. He's a professor at out of Talbot School of Theology at Biola University, and Biola's got a tremendous program of undergraduate and graduate studies in apologetics.
Well, very good. I just wanted to mention that. And, of course, there are many places where you have been speaking over the years. And, of course, I would highly recommend people finding out about Houston Baptist and Biola and a variety of other places where they can go. So anywhere you have Lee Strobel speaking, I think you would be benefiting from that as well. So, Lee, I know you have to head on to your next interview, but thank you for, first of all, writing the film, writing the book, and then writing that whole script for the film, because I know that sometimes is as difficult and time-consuming as writing a book. So it is just great that you have this. And again, I would encourage people to find out a little bit more, and they can go to thecaseformiracles.movie, or they can simply just go to pointofview.net and find everything they need. But Lee, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, you're awesome, Kerby. Thanks so much for you and what you do.
Well, let's, if we can, let him go on. And when we come back, we're going to get into a couple of issues. You know, we've been talking about health and miracles, and Star Parker has written about this idea of a broken healthcare system. So I wanted to get into that because we had this conversation on a Friday, but this is something which may be new information for some of you that weren't around when we had Hillary Care or we had Obamacare, known as the Affordable Care. And this is going to be an ongoing debate, obviously, because we're going to be dealing with, again, do we need enhanced various kinds of subsidies for people that are part of the Affordable Care Act and now called Obamacare. Also, we will get into another piece which I thought was very intriguing, and that is the fact that because of the big, beautiful bill, there are these so-called Trump accounts, and now you have Michael Dell of Dell Computers, Michael and Susan Dell, that have given a significant amount of money towards these Trump accounts, which ultimately go to the young people. So we'll explain that as well. A very positive action that has come from the big, beautiful bill, and something that might be helpful for the next generation of young people. So we'll get into that as well. But most importantly, take the time to find out a little bit more about the Case for Miracles film. If you go there, you will see that there's a link so that you can either purchase tickets or find out where it is being shown in your community. There's a place where you can maybe bring a group of individuals and get maybe sometimes a discount. I haven't looked to see if that is available, but certainly a great way to invite others to come with you to see the film. And as you might have gathered, Lee Strobel's got a wonderful way of telling the story, and we'd of course have the trailer up there for you to watch. Let's take a break. Come back with more right after this.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention as a program note that tomorrow we will have two guests, both from First Liberty Institute. That would be Kelly Shackelford and Aaron Smith. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the case that was argued before the Supreme Court on Wednesday on this evangelist, Gabriel Olivier. And so we'll get into some of that. And Megan's already pulled a little clip from the oral arguments that were given in the Supreme Court. Just thought you'd like to hear what it's like when they stand before those 9 justices and present their case. So the piece by Allison Hull is something we'll play tomorrow. Also, another case coming out next week on the separation of powers, which I give you a column that we've posted, which is expressing real concern about this. Quite frankly, I think if nothing else, it is something that needed to be done. So we'll have a back and forth with the lawyers there. Hope it doesn't get too much into the deep weeds, but this gets us back to what did the framers intend? What should an executive, whether it is Donald Trump or whether it's Joe Biden or whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's George W. Bush, how much authority should they have over, quote, independent agencies that are still under the administration? These independent agencies sometimes have been too independent, and that's why we have a thing called the deep state. Anyway, we'll see what that conversation goes. And then I thought it's about time to cover this issue. As you may know, the Charlie Kirk show, the people associated with Turning Point have said, okay, enough is enough. We're going to actually do a broadcast in which we're going to answer all of the criticisms, all of the charges of Candace Owens. We invite her to be on with us, if they want to have her part of that, and so we'll see where that goes. I thought it would be the most appropriate since Kelly Shackelford and his wife years ago went out to Turning Point. They know many of the people there. I know 1 or 2 of them, but he knows quite a few. We'll get into that, and we'll get into this upcoming election. Ben Shapiro has a very good piece on what might be a 2-pronged strategy being used right now by the Democratic Party, and even a commentary by Penna Dexter on California opt-out, which again relates to one of the cases involved with our lawyers. So be a little heavier on the legal side on Friday, but that's certainly appropriate, and that's why we sometimes do those religious liberty cases on Friday, because they are willing to come in. And let's be real honest, Kelly Shackelford isn't exactly looking for something to do. I know he's got a big event here tonight, and yet he's going to be here tomorrow, so we'll talk with him about those issues. Let's, if we can, get into 1 or 2 more. And Star Parker has done, I think, a good job of trying to give us an understanding of this upcoming debate that has to do with premiums and enhanced subsidies for Obamacare. And this is all the way back to when the debate was taking place with the Affordable Care Act. And she points out something early on in the piece, and you can read it. It's our second to the last article we've posted, so you can find it there. I did not realize this, and maybe the next time we have Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's kind of our medical expert, only 7% of Americans take advantage of Obamacare. I did not know that. And so if you think about this debate, we had the longest, as you said, longest government shutdown in our history over a contention that we should renew these temporarily enacted enhanced subsidies to Obamacare. And now when you look at that, you're going, and this debate was over, 7% of the people? When I think we're going to have a debate now here in December about these, and we'll look at what makes sense. But the point she's making here is that we do have a broken healthcare system. So let's start with the obvious. But just because we have a broken healthcare system doesn't suggest necessarily that the solution is to put everybody under Obamacare or to actually do what the socialists want us to do and have a single-payer plan. But let's at least talk about the problem. And she points out that if you look at the healthcare tracker, this is on the second page of this commentary, we are the most expensive country among high-income countries. And if you look at that, you can see that some of that has happened more recently. For example, from January 2000 to December 2024, so that's almost a quarter of this century, the inflation has increased, this takes your breath away, 87%. So that's certainly point number one. Over the same period, the cost of hospital services has increased 256%, and the cost of medical care services has increased 138%. So you can see that even at a time when we've had what I would argue is rampant inflation. And it's amazing to me that most presidents have wanted to ignore the obvious. Again, just put that in your perspective for a minute. Inflation of 87% since January of 2000. This is not even a full quarter of a century, and we have that kind of inflation. Now, I recognize a lot of the inflation in some of these other third world countries is that much in a year, but nevertheless, it helps us understand that that is the case. So why are those costs going up? Well, as I mentioned just as a throwaway comment yesterday, one of the reasons the healthcare costs are going up is because the government's involved. Now, that seems counterintuitive until you recognize that half of the healthcare spending in the United States was by federal, state, and local governments. She then uses a great illustration, which we've used before when we had debates about Hillary Care and Obamacare and all the rest. She says, think about the last time a doctor suggested you take a test. Neither the doctor nor you has any idea what the test cost, or even consider a situation where you could shop around and look for the best deal. I have occasionally done this with a doctor when they are recommending a test, and I ask, what will it cost? And you would think that I had just issued one of the most profane statements that could possibly be made in a healthcare facility, because you're not supposed to ask that. And the reason most people don't ask that is because, well, they're not paying for it. And the example I like to use is that if we went out to dinner after the program today, and I invited Steve, my producer, and Megan, my engineer, and I said, well, let's just go down. Well, there's an Olive Garden just down the road. Let's go to Olive Garden here, and I'm going to put it on the Point of View credit card. Well, they're not really going to pay as much attention to the price because somebody else is paying for it. If I say, well, let's go out, but everybody pays their own bill, well, they're going to pay a lot more attention. And I think you figured this out. And yet this does not exist in the healthcare system, and it needs to. Back to Star Parker, she says, President Donald Trump floated the idea of health savings accounts. The idea in various forms has been around for a while, but it has never gotten adequate, serious attention, although it does exist in small areas around the world and even around this country. But nevertheless, again, you and possibly your employer fund a tax-free account, which you can use to pay for routine medical expenditures. Regarding coverage for major incidents, you pay a high deductible insurance. It makes so much more sense. And as she points out, insurance right now isn't really insurance. Insurance is not something that covers routine expenditures. She says, what if you had car insurance that could be used to cover oil changes and routine maintenance? Well, you know what would happen there. So again, the idea of actually putting the money in your hands, you could do some comparison shopping too. Now, I recognize you have an emergency. You break an arm, you have a heart attack, you don't have a chance to comparison shop. But let me tell you that if you are going to get a hip replacement, instead of a broken arm, or in case you maybe need to do open heart surgery, Dr. Merrill Matthews ran the numbers a number of years ago. We need to have him run the numbers again. And the difference between getting open heart surgery in one facility and another was the difference, are you ready for this, of $100,000. And the care was the same. It wasn't like you were going to some back alley place. And so you can see that sometimes the way these things are charged is very different. So again, we also, of course, have health sharing plans. We've talked about those before here as well, where they're sometimes faith-based and you pay monthly dues and all of the rest. And those, I think, are sometimes very good because I've been involved with some of those in the past. One of the more known one is Medicare, but some others I've been involved with as well. And they are so helpful because you're put in a pool with like-minded individuals. In other words, to join the pool, you have to say, well, I'm not going to smoke, drink, use drugs, be involved in all sorts of high-risk activities. And guess what? The premiums can be a lot lower. The payments can be a lot lower because you're not doing things that raise the cost of health care. And so there are some ways to fix our broken health care system. And I think Star Parker's done a good job in just a couple of pages of summarizing some of the ways to begin to fix the system without going to socialism or without trying to enroll more people in Obamacare. So if you'd like to read it, I would encourage you to do so, and we will probably have that conversation again if for no other reason. I suspect that debate is just around the corner in Congress. So let's, if we can, take a break and come back. And I thought I'd end by talking about billionaire care for kids and capitalism. If you're not familiar with what we're talking about, we'll come back and explain that right after these messages.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again this weekend, talk about this last article. It comes from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. Billionaire cash for kids and capitalism. The Dell donations beat a guaranteed annual government income. Now, to understand that, let me back up a little bit. And this is something where I think I maybe misled a few individuals, because when we had what was called the Big Beautiful Bill, there was a provision in there to establish these Trump accounts. I was under the impression that those had to be formally established and that would require additional congressional approval. Apparently not. Apparently they are going to exist. You might say, okay, I don't even know what you're talking about. What is a Trump account? This is one of those situations in which in the bill, it establishes the fact that the federal government will put $1,000 for each child born between January 1st of this year all the way to December 31st, 2028. So it's an experiment, if you will, over a 3-year period. You can kind of figure out why that's the case, because once he leaves office, the question is, would the next president, I think if it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or somebody like that, yes. If it is a Democrat, it might be yes, because as I'll talk about in just a minute, Democrats might see this a way as to expand income redistribution. But nevertheless, the bottom line is you have an account that will be in your name, and it will actually be in the stock market, which is interesting. I'll get back to that in a minute, which I think makes some sense, because you put $1,000 in for a child who then can pull it out when they're age 18, which they can use for college tuition or to buy a home or to be involved in some kind of investment for their retirement, whatever it might be, start a business. There's a few provisions. $1,000 in 2025, by the time you're 18 years of age, is going to be worth, couple $100 in terms of real value. Hate to say it, but I just talked about inflation. But when you put it in the stock market, at least when it's put in diversified index funds in the stock market, you would assume that it would sort of keep pace with inflation. Anyway, that's the background. Now, here it is. The editors put it this way: billionaires are unpopular these days, even more than usual, and some of them are trying to court a better image by endorsing a government-guaranteed income for all. That's something we've talked about before. But Michael and Susan Dell, and that is the Michael Dell of computers, used to be a student in the University of Texas in Austin, dropped out to develop what today we all call Dell computers. What a successful entrepreneur he was. But they have decided to donate $6.25 billion, donate $6 billion to 25 million children for their savings accounts. What are those savings accounts? Well, those savings accounts are those individuals that are going to have those Trump accounts. Now, again, what he and his wife have done is this would provide $250 additional dollars for children aged 10 or under who were born before January 1st, 2025. And it will also target children in zip codes with a median income of $150,000 or less. So part of that has to do with the fact that they want to not only help those who are going to benefit from the Trump money, but also those before. So the good news is that their Trump accounts already have money in them. So if you have a 10-year-old child or grandchild, they already have money in these savings accounts. And, of course, the theory behind the Trump accounts, as they point out, is to give every young American a start to building up savings before they can even turn age 18. And the bottom line is, because of these Trump accounts, parents and other people can contribute up to $5,000 a year in these accounts after taxes. Employers can actually contribute. And Michael Dell has even said he's going to do this for his employee children. Now, again, I appreciate the fact that the editors of the Wall Street Journal figured this out. The Trump accounts aren't without political risks, since Democrats will try to expand the government donations to make the accounts another engine of income redistribution. And it's also possible, as they point out, that the political left might try to steer into assets of investments they agree with. But nevertheless, let's at least look at this without all the possibilities and recognize that, if nothing else, they point out that at least the money will first be invested in the private economy, and young people will get an early lesson in capitalism in watching their assets grow. Over time, the accounts might become large enough to use for tuition, a home down payment, Head Start on retirement. I've heard they could also possibly use it, as I understand, even to start a business. So whether you go to college or not, whether you decide you want to use it to fund your college, whether you want to fund your first business, that is the case. Anyway, Michael Dell, I thought it was interesting, told the Journal how he had $8 in a passbook savings account when he was 8 years old and enjoyed watching it grow. I became fascinated with compounded interest and learned about that at a very young age. And so the argument is maybe other rich Americans might want to donate to accounts for kids. And this, I think, could be a real opportunity to give young children a chance to see, this capitalist system isn't so bad after all. And so I thought it was just intriguing, but it's really the first time we've had a chance to talk about the Trump accounts. And these, I think, are now already getting funded, certainly for those individuals born after January 1st, 2025. But then now Michael Dell and Susan Dell have provided some for even earlier. And so that, I think, is a way to kickstart these lives in a significant way. As a person who's a fiscal conservative, I still have questions about the fact that we're putting money in accounts when we have $38 trillion in debt. But nevertheless, maybe this is one attempt to try to help young people get off on a better sound financial footing than what we have right now. But if we really are concerned about the price of homes or the price of college education, maybe we should go back and fix those as well. And of course we should. But I just thought you'd like to know about that. I had, I think, mistakenly led people to believe that this was still something that had to be done in the future, but apparently those accounts will be active and will be invested, and better to invest in a growing stock market rather than put under the government's hand. Because as you know, I've mentioned before, even when they say we balanced the budget in the 1990s, we really didn't. We just took money from these accounts that were set aside to actually deal with the increased demand from baby boomers in Social Security. And so we really were borrowing from Social Security even to make it look like we were balancing the budget. But we weren't. And we haven't been able to. And anytime government wants to get its hands on money, you know what happens next. So I thought it would be worth a mention. And if nothing else, just an illustration for the fact that Michael Dell, who grew up here in the state of Texas, went to the University of Texas until the computer business seemed to be working so well for him. He started what today we call Dell Computers. Incredible entrepreneur, and I want to give them credit for actually taking $6 billion of their wealth and distributing it to 25 million children in their Trump accounts. Pretty fascinating. Well, let's take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we have a lot to talk about with Kelly Shackelford and Aaron Smith, and so we will do that then. As always, want to thank Megan for help engineering the program, for pulling that clip that we'll be playing tomorrow, and Steve, thank you for producing the program. And just before we go, don't forget, I think you need to go to the Case for Miracles film, and you can find out all about that on our website at pointofview.net. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.